The air at the Thompson Farms harvest gathering was thick with the scent of fresh hay and apple cider. But when my dad, Earl, stood up to speak, it wasn't to toast the season's yield. His weathered face cracked into that familiar grin, the one he used to charm co-op boards and county fairs alike. "Folks, we've got big news," he boomed, raising his mason jar of sweet tea. "We're selling Thompson Farms for $10 million. And Harper," his eyes cut to me, sharp as a scythe, "you're getting nothing. Zilch." The barn erupted in laughter. My brother Wyatt's deep chuckle, my sister Avery's tinkling giggle, the in-laws' smug snorts. Cousins, neighbors, even the pastor joined in, their eyes glinting with that mix of pity and amusement reserved for the family screw-up. Me, the middle kid who ditched the farm for city dreams, the one who never fit their mold. I sat there, pulse steady, gripping my glass, and let the noise wash over me like a summer storm. Then I stood, slow and deliberate, and asked, "Who's buying, Dad?" He puffed out his chest. "Green Valley Distributors, out of Chicago. Big players. Paid up this morning." I smiled, raised my glass, and said, "Well, here's to me then. I'm Green Valley." The laughter died like a fire doused with water. Jaws dropped, forks clattered. My dad's grin froze, then cracked. What came next would unravel years of favoritism, expose dirty secrets buried in subsidy checks, and turn their smug dismissal into a reckoning they never saw coming. If you've ever been written off by the folks who should have had your back, this story's for you. It's not just about the money. It's about taking the table they never set for you and building an empire they can't ignore. And before we get back to the story, would you be kind enough to give this video a like? You know, every single like means a lot to me. It's the kind of encouragement that keeps me creating and bringing you even better stories tomorrow. My name's Harper Thompson, 32 years old, a woman who's clawed her way to the top of the agribusiness world, though you'd never know it from the way my family's looking at me tonight. I'm the middle child, the one they always overlooked, the one who didn't get the memo to stay in my lane. I almost didn't show up to this shindig. Family ties are like barbed wire, tight, prickly, and hard to shake loose, especially when they're laced with guilt and a pinch of spite. But here I am, under the warm glow of string lights strung across the old barn, at a gathering that probably cost more than my first year's profits, waiting for the moment they'll wish they hadn't underestimated me. The Thompson farm was decked out like a postcard from the heartland. Corn stalks tied with burlap bows lined the edges. Picnic tables sagged under heaps of fried chicken, coleslaw, and Aunt Linda's cornbread that could make a grown man cry. A bonfire crackled out back, sparks dancing like fireflies, and the air carried that rich mix of earth and smoke that screams Midwest harvest. Kids ran wild across the pasture, chasing glow sticks, while neighbors and old high school pals mingled with name tags pinned to their flannel. The band was tuning up for a square dance later, and everything felt like it was ripped straight from a county fair. But beneath the charm, the tension was thicker than molasses. I could feel it the second I stepped out of my truck. I rolled up alone, not because I couldn't snag a +1, but because I didn't need the baggage of explaining my life to someone who'd bolt at the first whiff of family drama. My jeans were worn, my plaid shirt tucked in just enough to say I tried, and my boots carried the scuffs of real work. Not the polished kind folks buy for show. The moment I walked into the clearing, heads turned, not with welcome, but with that curious, squinting look you give a stray dog wandering into a picnic. Whispers buzzed like flies. Cousins, aunts, the guy who sold us our last tractor. "That's Harper, right? The one who left?" A cousin with a clipboard playing event planner hustled over, her smile all teeth and no heart. "Harper Thompson, got you over here?" She pointed to a table on the far left, tucked behind a hay bale, where the chatter of the head table would be a distant hum. No accident there. I nodded, took my seat, and let the sting of it settle like dust on a gravel road. I was 12, hiding behind the barn door, when I first felt this kind of cut. Dad was out there with Wyatt, clapping him on the back for some touchdown he'd scored, calling him the future of this place. I'd just shown Dad my notebook, full of scribbled ideas for rotating crops to boost yields. He'd patted my head, said, "Stick to school, kid. This ain't your game." My chest burned, but I didn't cry. Just pressed my pencil harder into the page, promising myself I'd prove him wrong. That memory stung now, sharp as a splinter, as I watched Dad hold court at the head table, his voice booming over the crowd. My sister Avery was the evening's darling, glowing in a flowy dress, arm linked with her husband Travis, whose family owned the feed store down the road. Dad, Earl, stood tall in his best flannel, his gray hair catching the light like he was born to lead. Mom, Dolores, hovered beside him, her face soft but distant, like she was watching a play she didn't star in. Wyatt, my older brother, sat ramrod straight, his starched collar screaming, "I'm the heir." His eyes flicked to me once, cold and quick, like I was a smudge on his windshield. 5 years since we'd all been in one place like this, and the air was heavy with old grudges and unspoken rules. Avery caught my eye across the crowd, her smile tight, almost brittle. She tilted her head, just a fraction, and I swear there was something in her gaze. Suspicion, maybe, or a flicker of unease. Like she knew I wasn't just here for the cornbread. I held her stare a beat too long, then looked away, sipping my tea. The band struck up a soft tune, and folks started milling, plates clinking, laughter rising. But I stayed put, watching, waiting. I'd come with a plan, a folder tucked in my bag, and a secret that had turned their world upside down. How did a kid they wrote off as a nobody build an empire big enough to buy their legacy? Stick around, because the answer's going to hit harder than a hailstorm on a tin roof. The laughter from Dad's announcement still hung in the air like smoke, curling around the barn's rafters as I sank back into my chair at the edge of the Thompson Farms harvest gathering. The sting of their chuckles, Wyatt's smug grin, Avery's tinkling giggle, the cousins' sidelong glances felt like a boot on my chest. But I'd learned long ago to swallow that hurt, to let it fuel me instead of break me. My fingers traced the rim of my tea glass, cool and slick with condensation, as I watched the crowd settle back into their chatter. They thought they knew me. Harper, the middle kid who never fit, the one who bolted from the farm and left their legacy in the dust. They didn't know the half of it. My mind drifted back to the years that carved me into the woman who'd just dropped a bombshell they couldn't unhear. To understand how I became Green Valley Distributors, you've got to see the roots, tangled, deep, and sharper than any plow blade. Growing up on Thompson Farms was like living in a postcard you'd mail to someone you wanted to impress. Golden fields stretching to the horizon, a red barn that gleamed after every rain, and a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch where Mom would shuck corn while humming hymns. We'd pose for photos in matching overalls, Dad's arm around Wyatt, Avery's pigtails bouncing, me squinting into the sun. Neighbors called us the all-American family, the kind who'd make you believe in hard work and heartland values. But behind the curtain, it was a different story. Every supper, every chore, every ribbon at the county fair came with a score sheet. Wyatt, the eldest, was Dad's golden boy, football hero, broad shoulders, the kid who'd inherit the keys to the kingdom. Avery, the baby, was all sugar and charm, her mistakes brushed off with a wink and a "she'll learn." Me? I was the odd one out, the one who asked too many questions, who saw patterns in the soil and numbers where others saw dirt. I wasn't clumsy or loud, just not what they wanted. Too sharp, too quiet, too much like a puzzle they didn't care to solve. I was maybe 10, crouched behind a hay bale after a long day of hauling buckets, when I overheard Dad with Wyatt by the tractor shed. "You're my legacy, son," he said, voice thick with pride. "This farm's yours to carry." Wyatt, all gangly teenage swagger, soaked it up. I'd just spent hours mapping crop rotations in my notebook, ideas to stretch water and boost yields. I'd shown Dad earlier, heart pounding, hoping for a nod. He'd skimmed it, chuckled, and said, "Harper, don't waste your time on pipe dreams. Help your mother with supper." I waited till they left, then pressed my face into my knees, the scratch of hay biting my skin. Mom was in the kitchen, folding napkins, her back to me. I wanted to ask why she didn't speak up, why she let Dad's words cut me down, but her silence was louder than any answer. It was like she'd decided I was tough enough to take it, like my strength was an excuse to leave me standing alone. By 16, I'd learned to keep my ideas close, but I couldn't help myself one spring evening. I'd built a crude app on our clunky family computer. Nothing fancy, just a tool to track soil moisture and predict yields based on weather patterns. I'd stayed up nights, teaching myself code from library books, my desk a mess of graph paper and coffee mugs. I pitched it to Dad in the barn, my voice steady despite the butterflies. "This could save us thousands, Dad. It's real time, cuts guesswork." I handed him my printouts, charts neat as I could make them. He leaned against a hay bale, barely glancing at the pages. "Harper, this ain't farming, it's tinkering. You want to help? Stick to what you're told." He tossed the papers on a crate, turned to check his tools. My throat burned, but I nodded, polite as ever. Later, alone, I tore those pages to shreds, the rip of paper louder than my voice had ever been. That moment didn't break me. It lit a fire. I'd show him. Not with tears or tantrums, but with something he couldn't ignore. Wyatt, though, he never let me forget my place. Even now, at the gathering, I caught him across the barn, leaning toward a knot of cousins, his voice carrying just enough for me to hear. "Remember when Harper tried to fix the irrigation?" he said, smirking. "Nearly flooded the south field. Kid's always been more trouble than she's worth." The cousins chuckled, one nudging another, their eyes flicking my way. I kept my face blank, sipped my tea, but my pulse ticked up. Wyatt was 35 now, still Dad's mirror. Same square jaw, same confidence that came from never being questioned. He'd gone to Iowa State, got his ag degree, married into a family with land to spare. To him, I was a footnote, a failed experiment he could jab at to keep the spotlight on himself. But his barbs weren't new. They'd been there since we were kids, every time I tried to step up, every time I dared to think I could belong. Avery was different, but no kinder. At 28, she was the family's darling. All soft curls and easy smiles, the kind of girl who could burn a pie and still get a hug. But there was a sharpness to her, a jealousy that cut deeper than Wyatt's arrogance. I'd tried reaching out once, a year after I left the farm at 22. I was in Des Moines, scraping by, and sent her a letter. Not begging, just asking how she was, hoping to bridge the gap. I'd poured my heart into it, thinking maybe she'd see me, the sister who'd always been in her shadow. Her reply came a week later, a single line on a postcard. "Don't expect a welcome mat, Harper. You made your choice." I kept that postcard, tucked in a shoebox, not out of sentiment, but as a reminder. Avery didn't just follow Dad's lead. She added her own twist, guarding her place as the favorite with a smile that could cut glass. Mom, Dolores, was the quiet center of it all. She moved through the gathering now, refilling pitchers, her apron crisp, her face a mask of calm. Growing up, she was the one who'd bandage my scraped knees, but never my pride. She'd stand by while Dad laid down the law, her hands busy with dishes or laundry, her eyes anywhere but on me. Once, when I was 14, I asked her why she never pushed back when Dad shut me down. She paused, a dish towel limp in her hands, and said, "You're stronger than they know, Harper. You'll be fine." But I didn't want to be fine. I wanted to be seen. Her silence was a wall I could never climb, and it built the loneliness that pushed me to prove myself. Then there was Travis, Avery's husband, the newest piece in the family puzzle. He was 30, slick in a way that didn't quite fit the farm. Too much cologne, too many handshakes. He ran his family's feed store, but his eyes were always on the next big score. The kind of guy who'd pitch a get-rich-quick scheme and call it ambition. Dad liked him, though, saw him as a hustler who'd keep Avery's star shining. Travis was sloppy, though, careless with details, quick to sign deals without reading the fine print. I'd seen it in the contracts he'd inked with my suppliers, not knowing they led back to me. That sloppiness was my leverage, a crack in the family's foundation I'd widened soon enough. The band struck up a livelier tune, pulling folks to their feet, but I stayed put, my mind racing. The family I'd grown up with, Earl's iron rule, Dolores's silence, Wyatt's swagger, Avery's guarded charm, Travis's greed, had built a world where I was always the outsider. But I wasn't that kid anymore, scribbling ideas they'd never read, begging for a seat they'd never offer. I'd built something bigger, something they couldn't dismiss. And soon, they'd see just how far I'd come, how the girl they'd laughed off had turned their game upside down. But how did I get there? How does a nobody become the one holding all the cards? That's where the real story starts, and it's a hell of a ride. The band's lively tune faded into the hum of the crowd at the Thompson Farms harvest gathering, but my mind was miles away, tangled in memories of a family that never saw me. Wyatt's smug jab about my failed irrigation idea still echoed, sharp as a barb, and Avery's cold postcard from years ago sat heavy in my chest. I sipped my tea, the glass slick with condensation, and let the weight of their dismissal settle. They thought I was still the kid begging for a nod, the one they could laugh off without a second thought. But I wasn't. The fire Dad lit when he called my ideas pipe dreams had burned hotter than their bonfire, and it pushed me out the door of that farmhouse 5 years ago. That night, when I was 22, I learned what it meant to be truly alone, and how to build something from nothing. It started with a dinner that still tastes like ash in my memory. We were in the dining room, the oak table polished to a shine, Mom's pot roast steaming in the center. Dad sat at the head, Wyatt to his right, Avery across, giggling over some 4-H ribbon she'd won. I'd spent the day balancing the farm's books, spotting errors the accountant missed, and I dared to bring it up. "Dad, we could save thousands if we renegotiate with the seed supplier," I said, sliding a spreadsheet across. He didn't even glance at it. "Harper, you're a distraction," he snapped, fork paused mid-air. "This family's got enough on its plate without your meddling. Frankly, you're a burden to the operation." The room went quiet. Wyatt smirked into his plate. Avery's eyes flicked away. Mom just kept serving peas, her hands steady as stone. I waited for someone to say something. Anything. No one did. That night, I packed a duffel, notebooks, a few clothes, a pocket knife Dad gave me when I was 10, back when I thought he believed in me. I walked out the front door, my boots crunching on the gravel drive. No one followed. No one called. The screen door slammed shut, and Thompson Farms felt like a chapter I'd never read again. I landed in Des Moines in a garage apartment that smelled of motor oil and regret. The rent was dirt cheap, but so was the place. One outlet, a leaky roof, and a view of a chain-link fence. My air mattress sagged under a thrift store quilt, and the single bulb flickered when the wind howled. I didn't have a plan, just a fire in my gut and a promise to myself. I'd make them see me, not as the kid they dismissed, but as someone who could outplay them at their own game. First step was survival. I took a job at a co-op warehouse, hauling crates of potatoes and onions for minimum wage. My hands blistered, my back ached, but every shift was mine to own. No one knew my last name. No one asked about the farm. I punched in early, kept my head down, and listened. Workers griping about late deliveries, bosses muttering about Thompson Farms' sloppy contracts. That's where I met Clara, a bookkeeper with a smoker's rasp and a knack for spotting what others missed. Over coffee breaks, she'd lean in, her glasses fogging slightly, and whisper about the farm's overpriced suppliers and shaky deals. "Your folks ain't as slick as they think," she said one day, tapping a ledger. "Too much ego, not enough math." I nodded, filing it away, knowing those cracks in their armor would be my way in. Nights were for learning. I'd drag myself home, boots caked with warehouse dust, and crack open my secondhand laptop. The screen's glow was my only light as I studied supply chains, market trends, anything that could give me an edge. I lived on instant noodles and black coffee, the kind that tastes like burnt promises. My heater died twice that first winter. I fixed it with duct tape and stubbornness. By spring, I'd sketched out a platform for organic produce distribution, real-time tracking, fair trade links, cutting waste. It wasn't sexy, but it was smart, built to fix the inefficiencies I'd seen at the warehouse and on Dad's farm. I poured everything into it, every late night, every skipped meal. At 23, I pitched it to investors in a borrowed blazer, my voice steady despite the sweat trickling down my spine. "This could change how farms connect to markets," I said, clicking through slides in a stuffy Des Moines conference room. They didn't laugh, but they didn't bite either. One suit leaned back, smirking. "You've got grit, girl, but you need a front man. Get a guy to sell this for you." Another asked if I had a partner to explain the tech. I left with nothing but a stack of business cards and a tighter jaw. Then came the shark. A slick investor named Greg, all smiles and promises, offered seed money for 30% equity. I signed, naive and desperate, my heart pounding as we shook hands. He posed for photos, wired the funds, and I got to work. Rented servers, hired a coder, built the prototype. 2 months in, he vanished. Pulled the money, ghosted my calls, left me with a half-finished platform and a bank account in the red. I stood in my apartment, staring at the eviction notice taped to the door. The weight of failure heavier than any crate I'd hauled. My reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror showed a girl with bags under her eyes, a scar on her cheek from a warehouse mishap, hair tied back with a rubber band. I gripped the sink, knuckles white, and whispered, "You're not done. You rebuild. You rise." It wasn't a pep talk. It was a vow. I'd lost everything, but I wasn't the kid Dad called a burden. I was tougher than a $2 steak, and I'd prove it. I scrapped the flashy pitch decks and started small, freelancing for local co-ops to pay the bills. Clara slipped me more intel. Thompson Farms' fertilizer supplier was overcharging. Their trucking contracts were a mess. I saw my opening. A tiny grain elevator company, one of Dad's smallest vendors, was struggling. I scraped together every cent, took a loan with interest that'd make a loan shark blush, and bought a 10% stake. Not enough to control, but enough to get my foot in the door. I optimized their routes, cut costs, made them leaner than they'd ever been. They didn't know my name was Thompson, and I didn't tell them. That deal, small as it was, felt like striking gold. I stood in my apartment that night, the loan papers still warm from the printer, and realized I'd found my path. The farm thought they'd buried me, but I was planting seeds they'd never see coming. The glow of my laptop screen was the only light in my Des Moines apartment that night. The loan papers for the grain elevator deal still warm from the printer, their ink a quiet promise of what was to come. I leaned back on my creaky chair, the weight of that small victory settling in my bones. Thompson Farms thought they'd written me off, called me a burden, and left me to fade into the Iowa dust. But I wasn't gone. I was planting roots they couldn't see, roots that would choke their empire before they knew what hit them. That tiny stake in their supplier was my first step, a crack in their foundation I'd widen with every move. I wasn't Harper Thompson anymore, the kid begging for a nod at the family table. I was becoming something else, someone they'd never suspect. And that someone was going to take back what they'd denied me, one deal at a time. I needed a mask, a name that didn't carry the baggage of Thompson. Jordan Hayes was born over a cup of burnt coffee at 3 a.m., scribbled on a napkin between budget spreadsheets. It was sharp, sturdy, gender-neutral enough to keep people guessing. I registered Green Valley Distributors through a Delaware LLC, every step cloaked to keep my tracks clean. My first hire was a lawyer, a grizzled guy named Philip Grant, who didn't blink at my request for ironclad privacy. He cost me my last savings, but he was worth it. Built shells within shells, offshore accounts, and a paper trail so tight even the IRS would get dizzy chasing it. "You hiding from the mob or something?" he asked once, half joking, over a grainy Zoom call. I smirked. "Worse. Family." He didn't press, just got to work. With Jordan Hayes as my front, I was a ghost in the agribusiness world, moving pieces no one tied to the girl hauling crates in Des Moines. My target was Thompson Farms' supply chain, their lifeblood and their blind spot. Clara, my warehouse confidant, had spilled enough over our coffee breaks to know their vendors were sloppy, overpriced, and ripe for the picking. I started small, targeting their seed supplier, a mid-sized outfit called Midwest Growers. They were bleeding cash, stuck with outdated tracking systems that lost orders faster than a leaky bucket loses water. I offered a lifeline, a minority stake for Green Valley, plus my tech to streamline their ops. I'd rebuilt my organic distribution platform from the ashes of that investor scam, leaner and meaner, with real-time analytics that could predict yields down to the bushel. The deal closed in a smoky diner off I-80, their CEO too desperate to care who Jordan Hayes really was. I didn't crow about it, didn't post on LinkedIn. I wired the funds, shook hands, and got to work. Within months, their deliveries were faster, costs down 15%. Thompson Farms noticed. Dad even bragged about our new partners at a co-op meeting, clueless that I was the one pulling the strings. Next was the fertilizer vendor, a bigger fish. They weren't desperate, and that was the problem. Their manager, a guy named Carl with a handshake like a vice, flat out refused my offer. "We're loyal to the Thompsons," he said, leaning back in his office chair, a photo of him and Dad at a county fair framed on the wall. "No offense, Hayes, but you're an unknown. I don't bet on strangers." My jaw tightened, but I kept my cool, sipping the weak coffee he'd offered. "Loyalty's great," I said, "but you're overpaying for it. My platform cuts your margins by 20%. You sure Earl's worth that?" He wavered, but held firm, citing long-term trust. I left with a polite nod, but my mind was racing. That night, I dug into their books, public filings, thanks to Clara's tip on where to look, and found their profit margins shrinking. I didn't push. Instead, I bought out their trucking subcontractor, a smaller outfit they relied on. When Carl's deliveries started arriving early, with costs mysteriously lower, he came crawling back. I closed the deal for a 25% stake, no questions asked. Thompson Farms got better service, cheaper inputs, and Dad toasted efficiency at the next family dinner, never knowing I'd engineered it. Each move was a step closer, a quiet tightening of the net. I wasn't just buying stakes. I was building a system, my system, that made Thompson Farms lean on me without knowing it. My platform, branded as Green Valley Ag Suite, was their backbone now, tracking their orders, streamlining their costs. Wyatt, running ops, sent thank you emails to Jordan Hayes, calling Green Valley a game changer. I read them in my apartment, the hum of my laptop fan drowning out the city noise, and allowed myself a small smile. They were eating out of my hand, and they didn't even know whose hand it was. But the game wasn't without risks. One night, as I was crunching numbers for my next acquisition, an email pinged into my inbox. No sender name, just a string of numbers and letters. The subject, Jordan Hayes isn't fooling everyone. My pulse spiked, fingers hovering over the keyboard. The message was short. "You're playing a dangerous game. Thompson Farms has friends. Back off." No signature, no trace. I ran the email through every filter I had. Nothing. Someone knew, or at least suspected, that Jordan Hayes wasn't just a faceless suit. I didn't sleep that night. my mind spinning. Was it Wyatt sniffing around? Avery with her sharp eyes? Or someone outside the family? Someone I hadn't accounted for? I pushed the fear down, locked it away. I'd come too far to flinch. Then came Nate, a farmer I'd known since high school, one of Wyatt's old buddies from the football team. He ran a small operation, supplied grain to Thompson Farms, and had always been loyal to Dad. I ran into him at a co-op meeting, his flannel shirt rumpled, his face lined with worry. "Heard you're with Green Valley now," he said, voice low, glancing over his shoulder. "Wyatt's been talking. Says you're stirring trouble, Harper. But I've seen your work. Those new systems, they're saving my ass." I studied him, weighing his words. Nate wasn't slick, but he was honest. The kind of guy who'd rather break a sweat than a promise. "I'm just doing business, Nate," I said, keeping my tone even. He nodded, hesitant, then slipped me a card with his number. "If you're taking on the big dogs, I'm listening." That was my in, my first real ally outside the warehouse, someone who saw through Wyatt's bluster. I tucked the card away, my mind already mapping how to bring him into the fold. By the time I owned stakes in 3 of Thompson's key suppliers, Green Valley was a quiet giant, humming in the background of their success. I worked from the shadows, my apartment now a makeshift command center, whiteboard scrawled with org charts, a second-hand desk piled with contracts. Every deal, every late night, was a brick in the empire I was building. But that email lingered, a shadow I couldn't shake. Someone was watching, and I'd need to move faster, smarter, to stay ahead. I was rewriting the rules of their game, but the board was bigger than I'd thought, and I wasn't the only player. The anonymous email, "Jordan Hayes isn't fooling everyone," burned in my mind as I shut my laptop. The Des Moines skyline a faint glow through my apartment's cracked blinds. I'd built Green Valley Distributors from nothing, a shadow empire now gripping 3 of Thompson Farms' key suppliers. But that message was a splinter under my skin. Someone knew, or at least suspected, that I was more than a faceless suit. Wyatt? Avery? Someone outside the family, like a rival sniffing around? I pushed the thought down, focusing on the whiteboard scrawled with my next moves. Nate's business card sat on my desk, a small win. A farmer loyal to my brother, now leaning my way. I was rewriting the Thompson playbook, but the game was getting tighter, and I needed to play smarter. My net was closing around their empire, and I wasn't about to let a ghost in my inbox spook me off the board. By now, Green Valley controlled 45% of Thompson Farms' operations through my shell companies, seeds, fertilizer, trucking, even their grain elevators. Every contract they signed, every delivery they praised, ran through my systems. Travis, Avery's husband, was my unwitting pawn. He'd been promoted to ops manager, strutting around like he'd earned it, but the guy was sloppier than a pig pen after a rain. He inked deals with Green Valley's fronts without a second glance, thinking he'd scored big for the family. Every email he sent to Jordan Hayes, gushing about game-changing efficiency, landed in my inbox. I'd read them late at night, the hum of my laptop fan drowning out the city, and feel a grim satisfaction. Dad toasted Travis at board meetings, Wyatt clapped him on the back, and none of them knew they were handing me the keys to their kingdom. But Travis's carelessness was more than just a gift. It was a gold mine. Clara, my bookkeeper ally from the warehouse, tipped me off during one of our coffee runs. "Your brother-in-law's playing fast and loose," she said, sliding a thumb drive across the diner table, her voice low under the clatter of plates. "Found some weird invoices in Thompson's vendor files. Consulting fees, offshore accounts. Smells dirty." I took the drive, my pulse ticking up. Back in my apartment, I dug in, spreadsheets glowing on my screen. The numbers didn't lie. Travis was siphoning cash through fake consulting gigs, funneling it to a shell company in Belize. Over $1 million in 18 months, padded into vendor contracts with my suppliers. At first, I thought it was a rival pulling strings, Maybe that anonymous emailer, some big player trying to bleed Thompson dry. I spent a week chasing leads, cross-referencing accounts, even hacking together a script to trace wire transfers. Then it hit me. The shell company's filings had Travis's initials buried in the metadata. The idiot was stealing from his own family, and I'd caught him red-handed. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I called in a favor from a contact in Chicago, a forensic accountant named Lena who owed me for a tip that saved her firm a bad deal. "I need you to audit Thompson Farms," I told her over a secure line. "Pose as a neutral third party, routine check. Dig deep, but keep my name out of it." She didn't ask questions, just delivered. I fed her Clara's thumb drive and waited. 2 weeks later, she sent me a dossier. 85 pages of emails, bank records, and fudged reports, all pointing to Travis. It was a ticking bomb, and I was holding the fuse. I let him keep signing Green Valley contracts, each one tying him tighter to my trap. Every deal he thought was a win was another nail in his coffin. Clara wasn't done stirring the pot, though. She caught me outside the warehouse one morning, her breath fogging in the fall chill. "Wyatt's been talking," she said, eyes darting like she was spilling state secrets. "Spreading word at the co-op that Green Valley's shady, overcharging folks. Says he's got proof." My stomach twisted. Wyatt wasn't Travis. He was sharp, and if he was sniffing around, he might dig up something I couldn't bury. "Proof, huh?" I said, keeping my voice steady. "Let him talk. He's got nothing." But I wasn't so sure. That anonymous email flashed in my mind, and I wondered if Wyatt was behind it, testing me. Clara shrugged, lit a cigarette. "Just watch your back, Harper. Your brother's got a mean streak." I nodded, already planning to double-check my firewalls and paper trails. Wyatt could talk all he wanted. I'd built Green Valley to withstand a storm. Then the invite came. A crisp envelope, embossed with the Thompson Farms crest, landed in my mailbox on a gray October morning. My name was scrawled in Avery's neat script, but inside was a printed card. "Join us for the annual harvest gathering. Family and friends welcome." Tucked in the fold was a note, her handwriting sharper this time. "Seating's tight at the main table, Harper. Hope you understand." I read it twice, my fingers tracing the words. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a jab, a reminder I was still the outsider. But as I set the card down, I saw something else. Opportunity. The dossier on Travis was ready. My lawyer Philip had the acquisition papers locked and loaded, and Green Valley was poised to pull the rug out from under them. Dad was planning to announce the sale of Thompson Farms at the gathering, and I'd be there, not as a guest, but as the buyer. I called Philip, my voice calm but electric. "Prep the docs. Every contract, every stake. I want them airtight." He grunted. "You sure you want to do this in front of a crowd?" I smirked. "Oh, I'm counting on it." I spent the next week in overdrive, cross-referencing Lena's dossier, briefing my team, and mapping every move for the gathering. But as I packed my bag, jeans, plaid shirt, and a folder thick with evidence, I noticed something odd in the invite's envelope. A small, folded note had slipped to the bottom, missed on my first read. It was in Avery's handwriting, but messier, like she'd written it in a hurry. "Don't think you're invisible, Harper." My breath caught. Did she know about Green Valley? About Jordan Hayes? Or was this just another of her games, another jab to keep me in my place? I tucked the note away, my mind racing. The gathering was days away, and I was walking into a storm. But I'd built my empire in the dark, and I wasn't about to flinch now. If Harper's hustle is firing you up, give a quick like to cheer her on and subscribe for more. The real showdown's coming, and you won't want to miss what's next. The crumpled note from Avery, "Don't think you're invisible, Harper," sat heavy in my jacket pocket as I pulled my truck into the gravel lot at Thompson Farms, the sun dipping low over the Iowa fields. Its words gnawed at me, a riddle I couldn't crack. Did she know I was Jordan Hayes, the mastermind behind Green Valley Distributors? Or was it just another of her sharp little jabs meant to keep me in my place? I cut the engine, the rumble fading into the hum of cicadas and distant laughter from the harvest gathering. My folder of evidence, Travis's embezzlement dossier, acquisition papers, was tucked under the passenger seat, a loaded gun waiting for its moment. I'd spent years building this trap, and tonight, I'd spring it. But Avery's note, that anonymous email from weeks ago, and Wyatt's whispers about Green Valley being shady had my nerves on edge. The air felt charged, like the calm before a lightning strike, and I knew walking into that barn meant stepping into a snake pit. I got out early, boots crunching on the gravel, and leaned against my truck, scanning the scene. The Thompson Farms harvest gathering was in full swing. The barn glowing with string lights, tables piled high with fried chicken and cornbread. Kids darted through the grass, their glow sticks trailing like comets, while neighbors in flannel swapped stories over sweet tea. It was all American, picture perfect, but I could feel the undercurrent. Eyes flicking my way, whispers trailing like smoke. I'd shown up in jeans and a plaid shirt. No pretense, just me. But to them, I was still Harper, the kid who ran off, the one they'd written off as a failure. I adjusted my jacket, feeling the weight of Avery's note, and headed toward the barn, my pulse steady, but my senses sharp. Avery was the first to spot me. She stood near the dessert table, her flowy dress catching the light, her smile as polished as a pageant queen's. But her eyes, those were cold, narrowing as they locked onto me. She tilted her head, just a fraction, and I felt it. Suspicion, like she was sizing up a rival. Before I could cross the clearing, Mom stepped into my path, her apron dusted with flour, her face soft but tense. "Harper," she said, voice low, "don't stir things up tonight. It's your father's moment." Her words landed like a slap, gentle but deliberate. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "Just here for the food, Mom." She didn't smile, just turned back to her pitcher of lemonade, her silence louder than ever. I moved past her, my chest tight, and took a seat at the edge, behind a hay bale, where the main table's chatter was a distant buzz. Avery wasn't done with me. She glided over, a plate of pie in hand, her smile so sweet it could rot teeth. "Harper, you made it," she said, loud enough for the nearby cousins to turn. "I was just telling folks about that time you tried to improve the irrigation. What a mess, right?" Her laugh was light, but her eyes were knives. The cousins chuckled, one muttering, "Classic Harper." I sipped my tea, letting the jab slide off me like rain on a tin roof. "Yeah, I was a kid with big ideas," I said, my voice even. "Live and learn." She blinked, expecting a fight, but I wasn't here to bicker. Not yet. She leaned in, her voice dropping. "Don't get in the way tonight, Harper. This is Dad's show." I met her gaze, my smile just as sharp. "Wouldn't dream of it, sis." She walked off, her heels clicking, but I caught the way her hands clenched. She knew something was up. She just didn't know how big. I was nursing my drink when a new face cut through the crowd. Mia Reynolds, all sleek blazer and city polish, stood out like a sore thumb among the flannel and denim. I'd seen her name in investor circles, a shark who backed big agribusiness deals. She made a beeline for me, her smile too knowing, her handshake too firm. "Harper Thompson," she said, like she was tasting the name. "Or should I say Jordan Hayes?" My heart skipped, but I kept my face blank. "Not sure what you mean," I said, casual as I could manage. She leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "I know Green Valley's yours." "Smart move hiding like that. But watch your back. There's players out there who don't like surprises." She pulled back, her eyes glinting, then sauntered off toward Dad's table. My mind raced. How did she know? Was she the one behind that anonymous email? Or was she warning me about someone else? A rival, maybe, or even Dad himself? Before I could process it, Nate caught my eye from across the barn. He was leaning against a post, his flannel rumpled, his face serious. He'd been Wyatt's buddy since high school, but he'd slipped me his card weeks ago, hinting he was done with my brother's games. He gave a small nod, then tilted his head toward the bonfire outside, where Wyatt was holding court with a group of farmers. I drifted closer, keeping to the shadows, my boots silent on the grass. Wyatt's voice carried, low and heated. "We're taking the farm back," he said, his words sharp. "Green Valley thinks they've got us, but we've got a plan." My breath caught. Taking it back? From who? Me? Or was there another player I hadn't seen? The farmers nodded, but their faces were tight, unsure. Nate caught my eye again, his expression saying he'd heard it too, and he'd tell me more when the time was right. I slipped back to my table, my pulse hammering. The pieces were moving faster now, and I wasn't sure who was playing against who, but one thing was clear. Tonight's announcement was going to light a match, and I needed to be ready for the fire. The bonfire's crackle faded as I slipped back to my table. Wyatt's words, "We're taking the farm back," ringing in my ears like a warning shot. My pulse hammered, but I kept my face calm, sipping my tea to steady my hands. Nate's nod from across the barn told me he'd heard it too, and his quiet support was a lifeline in the storm I felt brewing. Mia's cryptic warning about players who don't like surprises and Avery's sharp note, "Don't think you're invisible," sat heavy in my mind, each a puzzle piece I couldn't quite place. The Thompson Farms harvest gathering buzzed around me, all string lights and cornbread, but the air was thick with tension, like the moment before a twister touches down. My folder of evidence, Travis's embezzlement dossier, Green Valley's acquisition papers, felt like a live wire under my jacket. I'd built this moment for years, and it was time to light the fuse. The band paused, and Dad, Earl Thompson, stood at the head table, his weathered hand gripping a mason jar of sweet tea. The crowd hushed, neighbors and cousins turning like sunflowers to the sun. His flannel was crisp, his gray hair catching the light, and that old grin of his could have sold tractors to a city slicker. "Folks," he boomed, voice carrying over the barn, "this farm's been my life's blood, my family's legacy. But it's time for a new chapter. We've sold Thompson Farms for $10 million to Green Valley Distributors." Cheers erupted, glasses clinked, but then he turned to me, his eyes hard as flint. "And Harper," he said, loud enough for every ear to catch, "you're getting nothing, not a dime." Laughter rippled through the barn. Wyatt's deep chuckle, Avery's high giggle, Travis's smug snort. Cousins smirked, the pastor looked away, and even Mom's face stayed blank, her hands folded tight. The sting was sharp, like a blade I'd felt before. I was 16 again, hearing Dad call my soil tracking app tinkering, his voice heavy with "You're not enough." My chest burned, but I didn't flinch. I let the laughter crest, let it die, and then I stood. The barn went quiet as I stepped into the light, my boots steady on the worn wood floor. Every eye was on me, some mocking, some curious, most just waiting for the family failure to fumble. I pulled the folder from my jacket, its weight grounding me, and looked straight at Dad. "That's a hell of a deal, Dad," I said, my voice clear, cutting through the murmurs. "Who'd you say is buying?" He puffed up, proud as ever. "Green Valley Distributors, out of Chicago. Big-time outfit." I smiled, slow and deliberate, and opened the folder. "Then you might want to meet the owner." I slid a contract across the table, the Green Valley logo bold at the top. "That'd be me. I'm Green Valley." The barn froze, jaws dropped, forks clattered, and Dad's grin shattered like glass. Avery's eyes widened, her hand clutching Travis's arm. Wyatt leaned forward, his face a mix of shock and fury. I kept going, calm as a summer breeze. I've owned 45% of your supply chain for years. Seeds, fertilizer, trucking. You've been signing my contracts, Dad. You just didn't know it. The crowd was a sea of stunned faces. But I wasn't done. I flipped to the dossier, Lena's audit, and held it up. And while we're talking business, let's discuss Travis. My brother-in-law's smirk vanished, his face paling under the string lights. You've been skimming over $1 million, Travis, through fake consulting gigs to a Belize shell company. I thought it was a rival at first, someone big, playing dirty. But no, it's just you, sloppy as ever. I tossed the dossier onto the table, pages fanning out. Bank records, emails, proof no one could deny. The barn was dead silent, every breath held. Travis stammered. This is... Harper, you're lying. His voice cracked, desperate. I nodded to Philip, my lawyer, who'd been waiting in the shadows. He stepped forward, all gray suit and steel eyes, and laid out a second stack of papers. Bank transfers, signed invoices. Your initials on the filings, Mr. Thompson? Philip said, his tone flat as a courtroom floor. It's airtight. Travis slumped, sweat beading on his brow, and Avery's hand dropped from his arm like he was poison. The family's eyes were daggers now. Dad's on me, Avery's on Travis, Wyatt's on the papers like he could burn them with a glare. I felt their weight, their anger, their disbelief pressing in. But I stood tall, my voice steady. Travis, you've got two choices. Resign as ops manager tonight, or I hand this to the feds tomorrow. Your call. He opened his mouth, closed it, then muttered, I'll resign. The words were barely a whisper, but they hit like a hammer. Avery gasped, her face crumpling, and Mom's hands shook as she gripped her apron. Dad just stared, his jaw tight, like he was seeing me for the first time, and hating it. I turned to the crowd, my heart pounding but my resolve ironclad. This isn't about revenge, I said, though part of me wasn't so sure. It's about what's right. Thompson Farms is mine now, and I'll run it better than it's ever been. The barn stayed silent, the air thick with shock and whispers. I caught Nate's eye near the back. He gave a small nod, his face grim but proud. Mia Reynolds, the investor who'd clocked me as Jordan Hayes, raised her glass, her smile unreadable. But Wyatt's voice cut through, low and dangerous, as he leaned toward a cousin. This isn't over, he muttered, just loud enough for me to catch. My pulse spiked. Was he talking about his plan to take the farm back? Or something bigger? I'd won the night, but the fight was far from done. The barn was a graveyard of stunned faces, the air heavy with the aftershock of my reveal. I'd just dropped the bomb that I was Green Valley Distributors, the buyer of Thompson Farms, and laid bare Travis's $1 million embezzlement scam with a dossier that left no room for doubt. His resignation hung in the silence, a surrender muttered under the weight of my lawyer's airtight evidence. Wyatt's low growl, "This isn't over," echoed in my head as I stood there, folder still in hand, the crowd's eyes boring into me. Avery's face was pale, her hand no longer clutching Travis's arm. Dad's jaw was locked, his pride cracked like a dry field in drought. Mom's hands trembled on her apron, and even Mia Reynolds, the investor who'd clocked me as Jordan Hayes, watched with a glint I couldn't read. I'd won the moment, but the storm wasn't over. The family I'd shaken to its core was about to fracture, and I was standing at ground zero. Avery moved first, her heels clicking across the barn floor like a countdown. The crowd parted, their whispers buzzing like flies. She stopped in front of me, her flowy dress swaying, her face a mix of shock and something sharper. Anger, maybe, or shame. "Harper," she said, loud enough for the cousins nearby to lean in. "I'm so proud of you. Taking all this on, it's incredible." Her smile was all sugar, the kind she'd flash at county fairs to win over judges. I nodded, wary, my grip tightening on the folder. Her words didn't match her eyes, which darted to the crowd like she was playing to an audience. Then she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a hiss. I knew, about Jordan Hayes. Months ago, I saw your name on a contract, buried in fine print. I didn't say anything. My breath caught, but I kept my face still. Why not? I asked, low and steady. She hesitated, her perfect mask slipping. Because I couldn't stand it, she spat. You, out there, building this empire while I was stuck playing Dad's princess. I hated you for it. Her words hit like a slap, but a memory flashed sharper. Me at 12, Avery at 8, both of us in the barn after I'd taken the blame for her breaking Mom's favorite vase. She'd hugged me, tears in her eyes, whispering, I'm sorry, Harper. I'll make it up to you. That was the only time she'd ever apologized, and I'd clung to it, hoping my little sister saw me. Now, standing here, I saw the truth. Her jealousy had festered, turning that moment into a grudge. I swallowed the ache, kept my voice even. You chose to stay quiet, Avery. That's on you. Her eyes flashed, but then they softened, and she stepped back, her voice breaking. I'm done with him, she said, glancing at Travis, who sat slumped, staring at the floor. He's out of my life. She turned and walked away, the crowd murmuring as she grabbed her purse and headed for the door, leaving Travis behind like a bad bet. The barn's tension spiked as Wyatt stood, his chair scraping loud enough to cut through the whispers. His face was red, his fists clenched at his sides. He didn't look at me. His eyes were locked on Dad, who still stood frozen at the head table. This is your fault, Wyatt growled, his voice carrying like a thunderclap. You pitted us against each other, Dad. Always picking favorites, always pushing us to fight for your scraps. And now Harper's turned it into a damn circus. The crowd gasped, neighbors shifting uncomfortably, but Wyatt wasn't done. He jabbed a finger at Dad. You made this family a battlefield, and I'm done playing. He stormed out, shoving past a table, sending a pitcher of tea crashing to the floor. The glass shattered, sharp and final, and I felt the weight of every eye on me. Mom's hands were white-knuckled now, her face pale, but she didn't move. Dad's shoulders sagged, just a fraction, but it was the first time I'd ever seen him look small. I turned to him, my boots steady on the floor, the dossier still in my hand. The barn was a pressure cooker, but I wasn't backing down. You taught me to win, Dad, I said, my voice clear, cutting through the chaos. Every time you called me a burden, every time you told me to stay in my lane, you showed me how to fight. But you never prepared for this, did you? For me to come back and take it all. His eyes met mine, hard and unyielding. But there was something else there. Shock, maybe? Or the dawning realization that he'd misjudged me. I'd spent years hearing his voice in my head, calling me useless, a distraction. Now, standing here, I felt that weight lift, replaced by something colder, sharper. You built this game, I said, but I changed the rules. He didn't answer, just stared, his jaw tight, as the crowd held its breath. I stepped back, ready to leave the barn, when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I slipped it out, keeping my movements slow, and glanced at the screen. A new email, forwarded from Lena, my accountant. It was one of Travis's old messages, one I hadn't seen in the dossier. The subject line read, Plan B, post-sale. My pulse spiked. The email was short, addressed to someone named M.R. Mia Reynolds? It mentioned a fallback to secure control after the sale of Thompson Farms. I scanned the barn, spotting Mia near the back, her eyes locked on me, her smile unreadable. Travis was out, Avery was broken, Wyatt was gone, but this? This was bigger, a shadow I hadn't seen coming. I tucked the phone away, my mind racing. I'd won tonight, but something told me the real fight was just beginning. The barn's silence lingered like a held breath as I slipped my phone back into my pocket. Travis's cryptic email, Plan B, post-sale to MR, burning in my mind. Mia Reynolds's unreadable smile from across the room felt like a taunt. Her eyes locked on me as the Harvest Gathering's chaos swirled. Wyatt's stormed exit, Avery's confession, and Dad's stunned silence were still raw, but that email hinted at something bigger, a shadow looming over my victory. I'd just claimed Thompson Farms as Green Valley Distributors, exposed Travis's $1 million embezzlement, and turned the family's smug dismissal into shock. But Mia's knowing glance and the mention of securing control after the sale told me the game wasn't over. My boots felt heavier as I left the barn, the night air sharp with the scent of bonfire smoke and Iowa earth. I'd won the round, but the board was shifting, and I needed to move fast to stay ahead. Back in my Des Moines apartment, the hum of my laptop fan was my only company as I dug into the email Lena had forwarded. The screen's glow cast shadows on my whiteboard, still scrawled with supplier charts and acquisition notes. The email was from Travis's personal account, dated a month ago, and addressed to MR. Mia Reynolds, it had to be. It was vague, but damning. Post-sale, we lock in Plan B. Voting rights stay with us. I cross-referenced my files, my pulse ticking up. Tucked in a folder from Lena's audit was a draft contract, unsigned, for the Thompson Farm sale. Buried in the fine print was a clause limiting Green Valley's voting rights on the board post-acquisition, effectively handing control back to the Thompsons, or someone pulling their strings. The document's metadata showed edits by M. Reynolds. My gut twisted. Mia wasn't just a bystander. She was in deep, and that clause was a trap to neuter my takeover. I leaned back, the chair creaking under me, and thought I'd been played by a rival firm, some agribusiness giant looking to siphon Thompson's assets. I'd spent hours chasing leads on competitors, big players like Agricorp or Midwest Futures, thinking they'd hired Mia as a front. But then I found it, a memo buried in Lena's dossier, one I'd overlooked in the rush to nail Travis. It was between Mia and Dad, Earl Thompson, dated 2 weeks before the sale. We let Green Valley take the title, it read. Then use the clause to retain board control. Hayes won't see it coming. Dad's initials were scrawled at the bottom, bold and unmistakable. My breath caught. Not a rival, my own father. He'd planned to let me buy the farm, thinking I was some faceless suit, only to pull the rug out after the ink dried. Mia was his partner, not his puppet. The betrayal stung deeper than I'd expected, like a blade I thought I'd dulled years ago. I called Clara at dawn, my voice tight but steady. Need you to dig into something, I said, pacing my apartment, the floorboards creaking under my boots. Any old deals between Dad and Mia Reynolds? Anything off the books? Clara, ever the bloodhound, didn't hesitate. Give me a day, she rasped, already flipping through ledgers in her mind. By noon, she texted me a scan, a contract from 5 years back, when Dad had sold a minor stake in a grain elevator to a firm tied to Mia. The terms were sloppy, favoring her, and Dad had signed without a fight. Clara's note was blunt. Your old man's been cozy with her for years. She's his back door. It was the missing piece. Mia wasn't just a shark circling the deal. She was Dad's ace, his way to keep the farm's power even after selling it. The board meeting was 3 days away, a virtual call to finalize the sale. I had 72 hours to turn their trap against them. I called Philip, my lawyer, his gravelly voice crackling through the line. We're going to war, I told him. Prep a counterproposal. Strip the voting clause, lock in Green Valley's control, and pull every email between Dad and Mia you can find. Philip grunted, used to my late-night calls. You're playing with fire, Harper. I smirked. Good. I'm bringing the gasoline. I spent the next 2 days in a blur, cross-referencing contracts, building a slide deck that would bury their plan. Lena sent more emails, each one tightening the noose. Proof of Mia's edits, Dad's approvals, their scheme laid bare. But pressure was mounting. One of Green Valley's investors, a nervous guy named Kessler, called me, his voice shaky. "Word's out you're moving too fast, Hayes. People are talking. Say you're hiding something. You sure this sale's clean?" I recognized Wyatt's handiwork. His rumors about Green Valley being shady were spreading, sowing doubt. "It's clean," I said, my tone sharp. "You want out, Kessler. Sell your shares. I've got this." He backed off, but the call was a reminder. I was surrounded, and trust was thin. Clara came through on the third day, slipping me a USB drive at our usual diner. "Earl's been funneling side deals to Mia since you left home," she said, sipping her coffee. "Small stuff. Land leases, equipment sales, always through shells. This one's from last year." She tapped a printout, a lease agreement with Mia's initials. It wasn't much, but it tied her to Dad's long game, proof he'd been planning this for years. I added it to my arsenal, my fingers itching to hit send on the board deck. The meeting would be a bloodbath, but I was ready. Dad thought he'd outsmarted Jordan Hayes, but he didn't know Jordan was me. And Mia? She'd learn what happens when you underestimate a Thompson who's been sharpening her claws for a decade. But as I finalized my slides, a new email pinged, a forwarded message from Travis's account, flagged by Lena. It was to Mia, dated yesterday. "If she pushes, we go to Plan C." My stomach dropped. Plan C? I'd thought I'd seen their hand, but now the deck felt stacked, and I was one move from finding out how deep this went. The cryptic email from Travis to Mia, "If she pushes, we go to Plan C," flashed in my mind as I closed my laptop, the glow of my Des Moines apartment fading into the pre-dawn dark. My whiteboard was a war map, scrawled with notes on Dad's secret deal with Mia Reynolds, their plan to gut Green Valley's control with a rigged voting clause. Clara's last-minute intel, a lease tying Dad to Mia for years, sat heavy on my desk, alongside Lena's dossier and my slide deck, a loaded weapon aimed at their scheme. I'd spent 3 sleepless days building this case, every email, every contract a bullet in my clip. Kessler's nervous call about shady rumors, likely Wyatt's doing, still stung, but I'd shut him down. The board meeting was hours away, a virtual showdown to seal Thompson Farms' fate. I'd thought I'd seen their whole hand, but Plan C was a shadow I couldn't shake. My boots hit the floor as I stood, coffee cold in my mug. Time to end this? The Zoom call opened at 9 a.m., my screen a grid of faces, board members in suits scattered across Iowa and Chicago. Dad sat center, his flannel swapped for a rare tie, his grin smug as ever. Mia Reynolds was beside him, her sleek blazer and cool smile screaming confidence like they'd already won. They thought Green Valley, me, Jordan Hayes, was a pawn in their post-sale trap, a way to keep control through that hidden clause. My camera was on, my face steady, my folder open. Philip, my lawyer, was a silent shadow in my apartment, ready to back me up. The board chair, a grizzled co-op veteran named Hargrove, kicked things off. "Let's finalize the sale," he said, voice flat. "Green Valley's terms are on the table." Dad nodded, his eyes glinting. Mia leaned forward, all business. They didn't know I'd seen their memo, their draft contract, their whole damn playbook. I let them talk, laying out their version of the sale. Thompson Farms for $10 million, Green Valley taking title. Then I clicked my slide deck live, my voice cutting through their chatter like a blade. "Before we vote," I said, "let's clear something up." I shared the draft contract, the voting clause highlighted in red. "This limits Green Valley's board power post-sale, edited by Mia Reynolds." The grid went quiet, faces stiffening. Mia's smile didn't budge, but her eyes narrowed. I flipped to the memo, Dad's initials bold at the bottom. "And this," I said, "shows Earl Thompson and Ms. Reynolds plan to keep control, thinking Green Valley wouldn't notice." Dad's grin faltered, his tie suddenly too tight. I showed the lease Clara dug up, tying him to Mia for years. "You've been planning this since I was a kid, Dad. but you sent the wrong contract to the wrong person. Mia jumped in, her voice sharp as glass. This is slander, Hayes. You're forging documents to steal the farm. She leaned closer to her camera, playing to the board. Green Valley's been dodging taxes, hiding assets. I've got proof. My pulse spiked. She was swinging hard, trying to flip the script. I saw Kessler, the nervous investor, shift in his seat, doubt creeping into his eyes. I'd prepped for this. Show your proof, Mia, I said, calm as ice. Because I've got bank records, emails, and metadata tying you and Earl to this scheme. Philip leaned in, his voice gravelly over the line. Ms. Reynolds, your edits are time-stamped. The memo's verified. You want to dig deeper? We've got more. Mia's face froze, her bluff called. The board murmured, Hargrove's frown deepening. Kessler spoke up, his voice shaky. Hayes, this is a lot. Why should we trust you over Earl? He's one of us. The room felt like it was closing in, every eye on me. I saw myself at 22, standing on the farmhouse porch, Dad's voice ringing. You're a burden, Harper. That memory, raw as a fresh cut, steeled me. I leaned into the camera, my voice steady. You trust me because I built Green Valley from nothing. I optimized your suppliers, cut your costs, and delivered results while Earl and Mia played games. Check the numbers. Green Valley's profits don't lie. Theirs do. I shared a final slide, Lena's audit summary, showing Thompson's losses under Dad's watch. Kessler hesitated, then nodded, his doubt fading. Hargrove called the vote. All in favor of approving Green Valley's terms? No restrictions? Hands went up, slow at first, then steady. Kessler's was last, but it was there. Against? Mia's hand shot up, Dad's followed, but they were alone. Hargrove's voice was final. Motion passes. Ms. Reynolds, you're off the board. Earl, you're barred from future votes. Dad's face was stone. Mia's a mask of fury. I exhaled, my heart pounding. I'd done it, stripped their power, locked in my control. But as the call ended, Mia's last look lingered, cold and promising trouble. I'd won the farm, but Plan C was still out there, and I had a feeling it wasn't over. The Zoom call's final chime still echoed in my ears as I shut my laptop. The boardroom victory settling like dust after a storm. I'd stripped Dad and Mia Reynolds of their power, locking in Green Valley's control over Thompson Farms, with a vote that left their faces frozen in defeat. Kessler's last-minute waiver had tested me, but I'd held firm, fueled by the memory of Dad calling me a burden years ago. Mia's parting glare, sharp with the promise of Plan C, lingered like a shadow, but for now, I'd won. My Des Moines apartment felt too small for the weight of it all, the whiteboard behind me a map of battles fought and won. I poured a cold coffee, my boots scuffing the floorboards, and let the quiet sink in. The farm was mine, but the family I'd torn apart was still out there, fractured and raw. I wasn't sure what came next, until my phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Meet me at the oak tree, please. The old oak stood at the edge of Thompson Farms, its gnarled branches casting long shadows over the frost-kissed grass. I pulled up in my truck, the afternoon sun low, painting the fields gold. Mom, Dolores, was waiting, her coat buttoned tight, her face softer than I'd seen in years. She didn't smile, just nodded as I approached, my boots crunching on the gravel path. Harper, she said, her voice barely above the wind. I owe you an apology. I stopped, my breath catching. Her hands twisted together, her knuckles pale. I stayed quiet too long. When your father shut you out, when he called you names, I let it happen. I thought you were strong enough to handle it. Her eyes met mine, wet and heavy. I was wrong. I failed you. The words hit like a punch I didn't see coming. I remembered the shoebox in my closet, stuffed with letters I'd sent her after I left at 22. Letters begging for a word, a sign she cared. I'd found them last night, rereading one in the dim light of my apartment. The ache of her silence sharp but fading, like a bruise healing. "You did," I said, my voice steady but soft. "But I'm here now." She nodded, a tear slipping free, and for the first time, I saw her not as the silent wall I'd hated, but as a woman who'd been trapped too. We stood there, the oak's shadow stretching between us. Not fixed, but not broken either. 2 days later, I was in my new office. A small room in Green Valley's Des Moines hub, walls bare except for a map of supplier networks, when Avery walked in. She looked different, her usual polish gone, her hair pulled back, her eyes red-rimmed. No flowy dress, just jeans and a sweater, like she'd stripped away the pageant act. "Harper," she said, hovering in the doorway. "Can we talk?" I leaned back in my chair, wary, the memory of her barn confession, her jealousy, her silence about knowing I was Jordan Hayes, still fresh. "Sure," I said, nodding to a seat. She sat, her hands fidgeting. "I was awful to you," she said, her voice cracking. "I knew you were Green Valley months ago, and I hated you for it, for being bigger than me. I stayed quiet to protect myself, to keep Dad's favor." I flashed to her at 8, her small arms around me after I took the blame for that broken vase. Her whispered, "I'm sorry." I'd thought it meant something. Now I saw it for what it was, a moment, not a promise. "Why now?" I asked, my tone even. She looked down. "Travis is gone. I'm done pretending. I want to start over, Harper. Please." I studied her, searching for a lie, a hidden angle like Mia's schemes. Part of me braced for a trick, but her eyes were raw, unguarded. She meant it. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the city's gray sprawl. "Green Valley's hiring," I said finally. "Data analyst, entry level. It's grunt work, Avery, but it's a shot. You prove yourself, you climb. No favors, no shortcuts." Her face lit up, not with her old charm, but with something real. "Thank you," she whispered, standing to leave. I nodded, the weight of her apology settling, not erasing the past but loosening its grip. As she left, I felt a shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but a door cracked open. That afternoon, I met Nate at a diner outside town. His flannel rumpled, his hands calloused from years of farming. He'd backed me at the gathering, his nod a quiet rebellion against Wyatt's bluster. "Got a contract for you," I said, sliding a Green Valley supplier agreement across the table. "Grain, fair terms, no strings." He scanned it, his jaw tightening. "Wyatt's been calling, saying you're trouble," he said. "But I trust you, Harper. Always have." He signed, and I shook his hand, the deal sealing more than just business. It was a bridge outside the family, a route I'd planted on my own terms. Back in my office, I leaned back, the city humming outside. I'd faced Mom, given Avery a chance, and pulled Nate into my circle. But as I opened my laptop to check emails, one caught my eye, a new message from Lena, flagged urgent. It was another of Travis's old emails, this one to Mia, mentioning Plan C again. "If the board fails, we move to the secondary buyer." My pulse quickened. Secondary buyer? The fight I'd thought I'd won was still alive, and someone, maybe Mia, maybe Dad, was still playing. I closed the laptop, my mind already mapping the next move. The faint hum of my laptop fan filled the quiet of my Des Moines office as I closed the screen. Travis's email about a secondary buyer, and Plan C still nagging at me like a loose thread. I'd just given Avery a shot at Green Valley, faced Mom's regret under the old oak, and locked in Nate's loyalty with a fair deal. But that cryptic message hinted at a fight I hadn't fully buried. My victory over Dad and Mia at the board meeting felt solid. Thompson Farms was mine, their scheme to claw back control dead in the water. But Plan C was a shadow I couldn't ignore. I leaned back in my chair, the city's gray skyline fading into dusk outside my window, and let my mind drift. I'd come from nothing, a kid called a burden, to owning the empire my family thought they'd keep. The weight of that journey settled over me, heavy but warm, like the Iowa earth after a long day's work. My office was no longer the bare room I'd moved into weeks ago. A map of Green Valley's supplier network covered one wall, pins marking every deal I'd closed. Seeds, fertilizer, trucking, all feeding into the machine I'd built as Jordan Hayes. From my window, I could see the edge of the city give way to fields, their golden rows stretching toward the horizon like a promise kept. I thought back to 22, leaving Thompson Farms with a duffel and a fire in my gut, Dad's words, "You're a burden," ringing in my ears. Every late night, every rejected pitch, every scam that gutted me had led here. Green Valley wasn't just a company. It was proof I'd turned their dismissal into power. Avery was downstairs now, crunching numbers in her analyst role, her desk piled with spreadsheets. She wasn't the pageant princess anymore. Her work was solid, her focus sharp. I'd caught her yesterday, double-checking yield data, her brow furrowed like she was proving something to herself, not just me. Green Valley was a force now, its contracts tight, its tech cutting waste across the Midwest. Farmers who once laughed at me now signed my deals, their co-ops humming with my systems. I pulled a shoebox from my desk drawer, its edges worn from years of moving. Inside were the letters I'd sent Mom after I left home, pages of my 22-year-old self begging for a connection. I'd read one last night, the ink smudged from my clumsy handwriting. "Mom, I'm trying to make you proud. Why won't you write back?" Reading it now, the pain was still there, but softer, like a scar faded by time. I didn't need her validation anymore, or Dad's, or anyone's. I'd built a legacy without their blessing, one that stood taller than their farm ever did. I tucked the letters away, the ache replaced by a quiet release. I wasn't saving them. I was saving myself. Last week, I'd stood before Green Valley's new board. Fresh faces. No Mia, no Dad. The room was all glass and steel, a far cry from the barn where I'd dropped my bombshell. They'd listened as I laid out expansion plans, my voice steady, no trace of the kid who'd begged for a nod. When I finished, Hargrove, the board chair, stood and shook my hand, his grip firm. "You've earned this, Hayes," he said, and the others nodded, their eyes holding something new. Respect. Not pity, not doubt. Respect. It hit me harder than I expected, a warmth I hadn't felt since I was a kid, dreaming up crop rotations in my notebook. That respect fueled my next move. I'd started a program for young farmers, kids like I'd been, full of ideas, short on chances. Green Valley was funding grants, tech training, anything to give them a shot. Nate was my first success. His grain contract now a cornerstone of our supply chain. He'd texted me yesterday, a photo of his new tractor, captioned, "Thanks to you, Harper." It wasn't just business. It was a mirror of my own fight, a way to keep others from the shadows I'd walked through. Trouble still came, though, small but sharp. A rival supplier, some outfit called Prairie Yield, tried to undercut us last week, spreading rumors about Green Valley's shady contracts, Wyatt's old playbook, probably. I met their CEO in a diner, a guy with a cheap suit and a loud mouth. "You're overreaching, Hayes," he sneered, tossing a napkin on the table. I leaned back, sipping my coffee, and laid out my numbers. Green Valley's yields, margins, farmer testimonials. "You're fighting a losing battle," I said, calm as ever. "Join us or get left behind." He folded in 48 hours, signing a partnership deal. My years of scraping, learning, and outsmarting sharks like Mia had made me untouchable. The challenge wasn't even close. I stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the fields again. This was my legacy. Not just a company, but a system that worked, that lifted others up. I'd been the kid no one bet on, the one laughed off at family dinners. Now I was the one they couldn't ignore. To anyone out there who's been written off, who's felt the sting of being overlooked, your story isn't over. You build, you fight, you rise. Share your fight with me, with someone who gets it. Let's show the world what the underdogs can do. If Harper's story lit a fire in you, like, comment, share it with someone who gets it, and subscribe for more tales of grit on our channel. Drop your story below. Let's keep this going.